lunch? Make a sandwich? Or I could eat those leftovers? Nah, just think I'll have... Human behaviour is the hardest thing to predict. It's the biggest wildcard in our projections of the future climate. So, what could the future look like? In this video, I'm going to show you two entirely possible future realities based on scenarios that are typically used by climate scientists like me and my colleagues. Remember, each of these futures is still possible. It's up to us to decide which one will come true. But first, let's start by summarising where we're at. These are the climate stripes. Every stripe represents a year since the Industrial Revolution, the baseline that we typically measure warming against. And they're coloured based on the planet's average temperature. You can see that greenhouse gases emitted by humans have driven the long-term average temperature up by 1.25 degrees Celsius, turning the colours from cool blues to hot reds. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that 1.25 degrees is already triggering devastating extreme events, raising sea levels, and decimating the natural environments we depend upon. As temperatures rise, the impacts of climate heating intensify, but so too do the risks of exceeding critical tipping points. Tipping points are thresholds beyond which change becomes irreversible. For example, the collapse of ice sheets. Once they're gone, the regrowth of these ice sheets is impossible on our puny human timescales. And without action, heating won't stop. If you were born in 2010, you were born at 0.62 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. If you started school in 2015 or 16, then you began your education in the world's hottest year on record. Although that record wouldn't stand for long. Because by the time you became a teenager in 2023, temperatures had risen even further and broken records again. And then again in 2024. What happens next depends on the path we take. By the time you finish university or training and you start your career, we will likely have exceeded 1.5 degrees, the internationally agreed threshold of climate heating that science tells us is safe. The thermometer ticks upwards as you push through your 20s and into your 30s. Somewhere along the way, you read reports of the first summer without sea ice in the Arctic Ocean, a major climate milestone. By the time you have your own kids, we will be well on our way to 2 degrees or more, a level that will lock us into irreversible changes. Above 2 degrees, the collapse of ice sheets like the West Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets becomes much more likely. And so too does the shutdown of important climate features like the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, a critical ocean current that keeps the European climate relatively warm. Vital ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest and coral reefs will collapse, and along with them, the livelihoods of millions of people. At this point in the mid-2050s, environmental policies in the developed world will be starting to make some impact, although the cost of your home insurance continues to climb every single year and plans are afoot to abandon some coastal towns and cities. Meanwhile, climate disasters continue to kill huge numbers of people in the global south, and despite some tokenistic attempts at international cooperation, economic progress in developing countries is still hampered by having to deal with the relentless impacts of climate change. By the time you're nearing retirement and looking forward to spending a bit more time with the grandkids, temperatures could be reaching 2.5 degrees. And by your 90th birthday, the mercury could level off at 3 degrees and the world will look very, very different. In another world, one which is still within grasping distance, we can start to turn the tide in your lifetime. Let's rewind. Because by the time you became a teenager in 2023, temperatures had risen even further and broken records again, and then again in 2024. By the time you're starting your first job, the multi-year average temperature will have exceeded 1.5 degrees for the first time, the internationally agreed threshold of climate heating that science tells us is safe. 2024, the first calendar year above that important threshold, was just a premonition of what was to come. But things start to shift around the time that you and your peers start thinking about having kids. Lots of your friends decide not to. It's just too hard to imagine raising children against the backdrop of economic and climate uncertainty. But you're optimistic, and you've always wanted kids. In your 30s, in the stolen minutes between looking after your 2 small children, you start to read some news reports that net greenhouse gas emissions have peaked, and the planet's emissions are no longer rising. Don't get me wrong, there's a long way to go, but the trend is now down rather than up. Temperatures are still climbing, but only just, and there's talk that they might start to plateau soon. The planet teeters on the brink of 2 degrees. As the kids grow up, you encourage them to get involved in the initiatives that are springing up all over your local area. There's a community food growing project around the corner now, and you're helping with a habitat restoration project on the little park that was created when the local authority decided to decommission the road behind your house. On the days you go into work, you take the train. It's a far cry from the ropey, underfunded and unreliable service you remember from your school days. Now it's fast, cheap and full of people. Driving your commute just makes so little sense these days. Emissions continue to fall as your kids grow up and finish school themselves, and you gain a few grey hairs on the way. Society looks quite different now, with very different priorities to the ones that you grew up with. But despite the gargantuan effort from all sectors of society to reduce emissions and restore habitats, many ecosystems are still being lost. You grieve the loss of many vital plants and animals that your kids will never see, including huge swathes of coral reefs. People work tirelessly to protect and conserve those that remain, but many important species are lost forever. Scientists speculate about the rate of ice loss from the Greenland ice sheet. Has it passed its tipping point? Sea levels are certainly rising fast, but only time will tell us for sure. Life carries on. Your eldest has their own first child, and you wonder what things will look like when your grandchild reaches your age. The year you retire, you throw a big party. Not because you've retired, but because global emissions have crossed the net zero line for the very first time. Temperatures are still high, higher even than when your grandparents were born, and extreme events continue to destroy homes and claim lives. But the forecasts are for them to fall. And somehow, by the skin of our teeth, scientists think that the crossing of most critical tipping points has been averted. By the time you blow the candles out on your 90th birthday cake, it seems like temperatures have started to fall. Your optimism has paid off. Your grandkids will still have to keep working to maintain your progress, but the roadmap is there. We're at a unique moment in time where our actions can change the future in a really big way. Our choices this decade will determine which of those stories is closer to the truth. I feel it's also important to say that neither of those possible futures are extreme scenarios. The first is a middle-of-the-road scenario that extrapolates onwards from our current policies. And the second is a more sustainable vision of society that reaches net zero by mid-century and pivots away from economic growth at all costs. I chose not to include the most unrealistic scenarios of either extreme fossil-fueled development or scenarios that limit warming below 1.5 degrees, because in my opinion, both of those are in the dust. Regardless of what happens, the climate will get more extreme in the short term. Some changes are already locked in. But our actions can change just how much worse things will get. What we prioritise now will make the difference. If we focus on human well-being and helping those who are less well off, we may just about see a future worth living in. If we make clever choices now, today's teenagers will see the benefits in their lifetimes. If instead we choose to carry on down our current path, concentrating wealth in the hands of maniacal billionaires and building walls to keep people out, well, that's a recipe for disaster. Every fraction of a degree matters, and our actions today will have ripple effects for generations to come. The future is in our hands. I know which one I choose. Things are tough out there, which is why I am so extremely grateful to my Patreon supporters who allow me to do this important work. So please do consider joining them over here if you can, and if you can't, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like and a share, because that is super helpful too. Watch this one next, and I'll catch you next time.